Ka-kang. Dun-dun.
We need to make a new one with just you going ka-kang, 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 ka-kang. Like,
for 60
like
seconds.
a minute.
We'll just loop it. That's crazy. That's it reminds me of some of the YouTube channels I like where it's just like the beginning scene of Commando where he storms a beach and he drags his gear onto the surf and he's putting on his stuff and he puts in his knife and he puts in his grenades and he puts grease paint across his face and somebody looped that for 10 hours. It was just the same thing going over and over. It's mesmerizing. But you know what else is mesmerizing? Pencil to pencil. Look, we're back, you guys. We're back in it. That's right. Like SCTV.
That's right.
Very 3D. Guys, welcome back to the live LIVE livecast. Where every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, that's right, you dear viewer, get to hang out with expert cartoonists. Look, I got goosies thinking about it. Where else on the internet can you talk to 3 expert cartoonists at the same time? I am JAMAR NICHOLAS. I'm your first host. I am the Philadelphia chapter chair of the National Cartoon Society and also a board member. Not also my client. I'm a member. And on top of all that other stuff, I'm also a cartoonist. In the traditional book space, they call me an author, illustrator. Leon the Extraordinary is on sale now at stores everywhere. But guess what, you guys? This is great. Just today, I got my orders from Scholastic. Leon Worst Friends Forever is going to the printer.
Wow.
It's going to the printer. So Leon Worst
These are falling all over the world.
like in Lord of the Rings. Leon Works Forever will be in stores October 1st. It's up for pre-order. Cop it, why don't you? Guys, I would be in remission if I did not introduce my co-host. You know him in these streets as the world heavyweight champion of webcomics. Make the belt motion. By God, it's Stone Cold Steve Conley. What up, Steve Conley?
My back.
By God. How are you,
Hello,
sir?
gentlemen. I missed you. I want to double back. I want to find out more about that. I got my order thing. That seems like that's news. I want to talk about that. But
well, do your intro.
My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's available on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics. Every place. It's every place. If you're on the internet, it's right there. And I'd be remiss, I believe. Is that the word? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Tower Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the Kirby Crackle to our snap and pop, Mr. Mike Manley.
What up?
Hello, everyone.
Nice Jim Lee hand you just had.
I draw the Phantom and Judge Parker, and I have been told I have drawn your childhood.
My childhood.
I am a 40-year veteran. 40 years sitting in this chair.
The same chair.
The same chair.
That's a good segue to tonight's topic.
Yeah. I've been doing this since 1984.
Wow, Mike.
And this is the thing that I wanted to do when I was 13 years old. That was when I set my compass, and I had my little chart, and I decided I wanted to be a professional cartoonist.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And I bought this chair, and it was all magic after that.
And put up a link for where people can buy that chair, Mike.
You can buy this chair.
You can the Amazon affiliate link.
Yes, and it's been this chair, which is actually more comfortable than the expensive gaming chair that I bought behind me. But it's been ravaged by my cats, so it's battle damaged but comfortable, just like an old pair of shoes.
I love it. And Mike, did you say what strips you're working on currently? Did you say that?
Yeah, I'm working on I'm working on Judge Parker. I just turned the strips in today, and I have read my first 4 weeks of the next Phantom story, which I will be starting tomorrow.
Wow, welcome back.
Which should be in, I think, will be in print on either June 3rd or June 10th.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, welcome back to the fray, Mike Man.
Yes, back in the Skull Cave.
That's
fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a. This is almost kind of like we used to call back in the day of the the live cast, which has been going on for 4 years, you guys. Talking about anniversaries. As we started the YouTube version of Pencil to Pencil, when it was April 2020. It's almost 4 years to the day.
Wow.
In deep pandemic when we started doing this, but don't be fooled. We had been doing Pencil to Pencil before that, and even before that, as a straight up audio podcast. So we're not new to this. But even back then, just to think about how quickly time is going by, and that's going to kind of tie into what we're going to talk about tonight. So I was going to start by talking about a palate cleanser. The palate cleanser was kind of after we had a guest. We almost took like a week to kind of catch our breath after we had a guest on and just kind of choose a different topic or maybe even reminisce on who we just had on. And last week, if you missed it, we had Brian Lee O'Malley on, creator of Scott Pilgrim. You may have seen Scott Pilgrim Takes Off on Netflix over the last couple of months. And this is funny, you guys, before we even talk about Brian. At the beginning of the year, I had a family function, and one of my young cousins, who, to say young, he's like 20. You know what I'm saying? And he was like, "Oh, yo, man, have you ever heard of Scott Pilgrim?" And I was just like, "Man, I feel so old." He had just discovered it. He was like, "Yo, I was watching this thing. It's cool." I was like, "Come in here. Let me show you some stuff." I showed him the shelf, and he was like, "It was a comic book." So just to that, you see that there's always new eyeballs. There's always new people coming in to discover you. What was that old thing about comics they used to say, that every issue was somebody's first?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like the proof is in the pudding right there, because that's something that I know very well. And for a lot of our contemporaries and people in the know, they know that Brian Lee O'Malley has kind of carved a very important footprint into creator-owned work. So I love to celebrate them. I would love to hear any thing that you may have taken away from last week, Steve.
Well, I really love the conversation, and I had not watched the previous episode where you guys had interviewed him the first time around and got his origin story and the basics, and I watched that and I love them both. So I'm not sure how we can add. I need to find a way to make sure that the archives of this have a tag to the previous episode. But really, really excellent, super nice guy, and great that we had a chance to talk to him. If people haven't watched that episode, please do. It's excellent.
Yeah, you know what I love about having things like that on and people like that on, and to talk about the archives of what we've been doing over the years, is I've said this on many occasions. Please do not be surprised who we have on the show, because what did I say at the beginning of this? Expert cartoonists, right? Like things happen and you're like, oh, Walt and Weezy are on. Why are you surprised Walt and Weezy are on? You know what I mean? Just drink it in, enjoy it. Don't question it. Mike, what did you?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Mike, what did you think about having Brian on for a second time, or maybe there's a little correlation between his first visit versus his last visit? Or, you know.
Well, the thing I think is, for me, that's interesting is, he was interviewed in the magazine, originally Draw Magazine, and just to watch someone grow through their career, to me, that's one of the interesting things. And sometimes it's with a singular project like Scott or Pilgrim, right? And sometimes it might be multiple different projects. So it's interesting to see also maybe how his art has matured and evolved. There's still a genesis going on, We generally don't think about it in a current way, but it's like if you look at Charles Schultz's work, you look at his 50s work, and then you look at his 60s work, you can really see there's an evolution, even of something like, the way Snoopy was drawn changed quite a bit over the course of 15 years or so. So I find that, to me, very interesting about looking at artists and how they, even if they're doing the same characters, will continually evolve their style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. And what you just said about Peanuts made me think about kind of like having columns of fans of material, and how there are people who have very vivid, strong memories of Peanuts, but they're talking about the Thanksgiving special and probably have
Right.
never read the comic strip. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, remember when Franklin and they had the popcorn and the jelly beans? Like, wait, you never read the comic strip? There's a comic strip?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends upon what your age and what your access point is. Because I mean, for me, I mean, Peanuts was pretty ubiquitous as a kid because it was everywhere. There was the specials, but there were also all of the Scholastic books, and if you went to a library, there was Peanuts there, so you could really get something like that. And then there was all the, gosh, you know, you go to your cousin's birthday, and there would be Snoopy party favors and all that stuff. I mean, it was really everywhere as a kid. So even if you weren't, I mean, I don't know how many kids read papers, but I suppose back in that day, I mean, I remember my dad having the paper, and then I don't remember reading specifically the daily paper, but I always remember reading the Sundays.
Yeah, the color fun.
And there was back when the papers were still big. They were still large.
Mm-hmm,
you know.
mm-hmm.
I might have mentioned this before, but when I was a kid, we didn't get the paper in our house, but my grandparents got it in theirs. They got like the Newsday and the Daily News back on Long Island. And every birthday and Christmas, my grandmother would give me these composition notebooks into which she clipped out and pasted runs of Peanuts, Garfield,
Wow.
the Hulk comic strip back when this was like the 70s, and the Spider-Man comic strip.
Wow.
And I would get these. I had them until, many houses ago, many homes ago. But they were, those are my first comic books. Those are everything to me. And just reading Peanuts again and again and again, and Garfield again and again. Nowadays, it's like, what's a newspaper? Forget what the comic strip. What's a newspaper?
That's so funny, and just kind of the access point for, and kind of like what you guys alluded to. I also remember having a dalliance. That's my big $5 word for the night. With the paperbacks, there was like the Fawcett paperbacks. Like I have a bunch of Dennis the Menaces over here, and Andy Cap, and all that kind of stuff, which isn't the comic strips. So you can see like things have always been kind of repackaged and put in different ways.
Yeah. I had those too. Some of them came from Scholastic. Some of them, I remember, I started seeing the classic EC Mad before it was Mad Magazine. With Bat Boy and Reuben, all the great Wally Wood early Kurtzman stuff. I had this little trades called what was it? The Mad and the Son of Mad.
Bride of Mad and things like that.
Don Martin and everything. And so when you would go to probably like a Kresge or what are they called? The dime store back in the day.
Woolworths.
Right. Yeah. They always had those. So I bought a lot of stuff, including like a Kirby FF reprint as
like as like a little thicky.
Like a little mini, what we would call them trades now, but they were pocket books, I think that they used to call them back in the day.
Yeah, I love it, and we still.
And there was,
go ahead.
The pocket books of the Marvel stuff too, the Amazing Spider-Man, the few volumes of that, Fantastic Four. Those are my first Marvel comics. Those are the ones that I read again and again and again. The Barry Windsor Smith, Conan. They were all reprinted in those little books, and man, I tore those up.
That's a really great memory, because I kind of recall now. Part of my origin story is that I was a comic strip kid, and I got into comic books later. But I think, I didn't ever even know there were comic book stores until I was in high school. So that wasn't a thing where I was. I mean, they existed, but I didn't know.
You didn't go down to Green Onions?
Man, like that was comic book stores were something you knew about because somebody told you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, where'd you get this really thin brown bag of comics? Oh, I went to Fat Jack's. What's that?
Yeah.
You know, and it starts from there because there's no internet, you know, and I wasn't looking at the yellow pages for comic books. You know what I'm saying? So my big thing was in the supermarket, kind of like those little pulp paperbacks, but they had these little kind of digests, like the Marvel digest, and it was like a lot of Ditko Spider-Man stories in there.
Yeah.
I don't remember much else, but you know, that was kind of the beginning of it. So it's interesting we brought this up. So guys, let's kind of get this started. That's right, Marshall. Dang. We had a fantastic talk last week. I'm really excited to see some holdovers from last week. We got a lot of traffic. There's always eyeballs on whatever Brian's doing. And I like to call it the slipstream. We had a lot of people come in to check out the live cast from Brian. And I see some faces that stuck around. So if you discovered Pencil to Pencil last week and you're still here, thank you very much. There's a lot more to come. And, you know, I appreciate you sticking around because this is where it's at. So we have a pretty heady topic tonight. And we were talking in the green room before we went live, kind of about how to just approach this. And if you've been following our talkies, is what I'm calling them tonight, where it's just us talking through things. We've done a lot of things that have touched on some of these subjects over and over again. Like, what was it, like the 5th or 6th or 7th episode? We were just like numbering episodes or talking about your career toolkit. All these things kind of start at a really important question. And I think the really important question that you have to ask yourself, because there's, you know, I talk about the catalyst or the jumping off the cliff moment or that lightning strike moment where you realize, like Mike said, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I think a lot of people get that call, like like the Joseph Campbell.
Totally picturing that when you're talking about it. Yeah.
Circle, right? You're visited by an old man.
The call to adventure.
A call to action. What do you do about it? Right. So the name of this episode is the sacrifice episode. And I think all of us are going to have different angles on this. And I would love to hear what the chat room thinks about this. This is going to be very interactive. So maybe at the beginning of this, Mike Manley, my dear friend, says at the beginning of a lot of our conversations about this, and Mike, I'll put you first.
I was going to go last. I was going to let you guys go first.
Oh, well, maybe I'll just start with this. Mike says a lot, and I agree with him, but I want to kind of maybe unlock that a little bit more. A lot of where you go depends on your personality, right? Mike says personality a lot. And I think that's really interesting. I also think that already comes from a knowledge of yourself. And I think something that a lot of young whatevers don't really know what they want to do. So I feel like even having that personality set and knowing that you want to do this is already like a level or 3 up from somebody who's just like, I don't know, I just like to sit here and do some stuff. So maybe I'll start with like answering the call. And we're just going to talk through this because I don't know where I'm going. Right. I talked to a lot of cartoonists. I remember my own little origin story where I realized there was a catalyst moment where I remember I won an art contest. I won a public art contest. And I was reading a newspaper as I was wont to do as a young kid because I was a weirdo.
How old are you here?
3. No, I don't know. I was probably 8. I was probably
your pork pie hat and your newspaper.
So I'm reading a newspaper, and there's a contest downtown in Philly at the Hershey Hotel. I'm showing my age, and it was like a sidewalk street chalk contest. This is the 80s, and it was on Sunday. Just go down to the hotel. You get a patch of sidewalk. And whoever wins gets like as many tickets as they want to Hershey Park. So, you know, I told my mother, like, can we go to this thing? And she was like, you know, she was always just like overwhelmed with me. Okay, fine. And I spent the rest of the weekend doing these sketches. Like I was planning this out in my head. It's like, all right, so if I have this much space, then maybe I'll do this tree. And somebody's like, that was my obsession for the rest of that weekend, was trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I get there, somebody hands me a piece of chalk, and I just get busy, right? And I won this thing, and that feeling was like, it was electric.
What did you draw?
I drew some kid like sleeping under a tree. It was very cartoony because I think even back then I was a big Burt Breathitt fan, and you've seen my big feet that I still draw. So it was a very Bloom County-ish type of drawing.
How old?
See, now I'm messing it up. I feel like I was 9 or 10. You know what I mean? It was in there somewhere. I might have been a little younger, and I won, and it was just like this attention was very new, and it was surreal, and I was being recognized for something that I put somewhere. You know what I mean? And like that was a little moment where I was like, I really like this, and then it kind of went from there where I drew goofy pictures of my friends in school, and that was great. But let me push this along. So I get a little further ahead in my life, and now I'm going to go to this really important magnet creative high school in Philly. And my mother, who was already an artist, which is probably the bigger catalyst for me, sat me down and said, look, if you want to go to this place, you have to take it seriously, because there are other people that want your spot. And if you want this, you're going to have to work really hard for it. And you know what I mean? It's just, I'm getting all the stuff dumped on me like this is real now. This isn't just goof around time. So I started, I think, getting patterned into thinking about taking this stuff seriously above other things. So like my sacrifice started earlier than I think other people who were not thinking about being a cartoonist when they grow up. So, I think I wonder maybe in the chat if they have like a lightning strike moment where they knew this is what they wanted to do, or even if they don't do cartooning, if they had something that they knew it was that moment. But to kind of bring this back around, there are a million times where you don't answer that, right? You don't meet that halfway, and you go, well, you know what? It's too hard, or it's, maybe I want to do this, or like I really like girls right now more than sitting down and drawing, and I'm going to go chase girls through the hallway at school. And I think that door starts to close after a while. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. Maybe you guys can save me from what I'm running my mouth here.
Which door would you in that conversation? What was the door in that context?
Well, you know what? I mean, for me, it's kind of like I just wanted to do this, and I never had something else I wanted to do that was serious. But maybe I'll save my own conversation with this. But I also knew there was a lot of resistance, and I like to talk about resistance. One of my favorite books is called The War of Art, Not the Art of War, by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about resistance. Now, we've talked about this before. Resistance takes a lot of forms, and resistance to your goals can be a well-meaning girlfriend who thinks that you spend a little bit too much time in that room, and what are you really doing? And like you need to go get a job and make some money and stop dicking around with whatever. Those little things can like just shunt you off course very easily, and name it. There's a million things, even besides your own gut, who does, what do you call it? Imposter syndrome. All these things kind of add up. So I guess where I'm going with this is that everybody who is in a chair in their studio and has gray hair like us had to go through a lot of things to get where they are, not just being really good at art or having what they say, you're really talented. I wish I could draw. Mike Manley. I can't even draw a straight line, Mike Manley. I can't draw a stick figure. You know what I mean? And we all bristle when we hear things like that, because you're like, you're not even halfway there with this conversation. So, all right, I'm going to shut up and try to figure this out. So this is, like I said, it's going to be a really like just catch can night. So I'm wondering how people feel about the resistance part of it. Maybe I'll just say that, and then I'll go ahead.
It seemed like you wanted to jump in there, Mike. Was there something you wanted to say?
No, you go ahead, Steve.
No, there's so much of that rings true to me. The idea of resistance, the sacrifice. I mean, even think about the 10,000 hour rule, which is not something I was cognizant of until much later. Like, I don't think, I mean, when was it popularized? Freakonomics, the Malcolm Gladwell book, much later. But the idea of 10,000 hours of just putting that in just to become competent. I mean, some people do have a gift. There's no question. You know, the raw material might be there. Or to me, it's that wonderful moment you talked about, that catalyst that kind of maybe you were recognized as an individual, recognized for an achievement, recognized for your creativity, and that somehow was like, oh, I'm not sure if it's a feeling you're chasing or more like that gave you a focus into who you are. Like, oh, that's who I am. I'm the guy who made this this illustration. Or using art to, if you are interested in pursuing others romantically, that your art is a lure. You know, it's not necessarily something which gets in the way, but it can be something that, you know, might be the only thing you've got going for you. That was how I felt about it. But the things that get in the way, they're tremendous. I mean, but in terms of sacrifice, I don't know. I part of me, as I mentioned to you guys before we went live, that one of the title of this almost to me was "At What Cost?" Right. Like, I want to be a cartoonist, but what is it going to take for me to do that? And I knew it was going to be just sitting down away from everybody else. And you know, I'm not sure if I'm an introvert, but cartoonists certainly made me live the life of one. I think what I didn't know, and you can't tell from looking at those early Spider-Man comics, is just how much time it takes.
Yeah,
you're reading it and it's so much fun and it's so breezy and they make it look so easy. But the idea of, you know, talking with you guys on deadline at the wee hours of the morning, because you know, some deadline is looming. That's just such a harsh reality of this business that, you know, if you want to have that kind of 6 o'clock dinner time and then watch TV until you get tired and go to sleep at a cozy hour, you know, that just isn't an option. I mean, although maybe there are some cartoonists who are able to do that.
No, that's good, Steve. And so what I was thinking about, and, you know, please hit the ball back and forth with me here, is maybe just like the human aspect of what sacrifice means in our time. I say all the time things like, sometimes people are really disappointed in me when I can't throw pop culture stuff back and forth with them, because I don't watch a lot of TV. You know what I mean? I know about it. I think that's more important than me sitting down and watching it and critiquing it. But I just don't. And I hadn't thought about it as a sacrifice, you know, maybe until just thinking about this topic for the last couple of weeks. You know, like, I didn't watch Game of Thrones. I didn't watch this. I didn't watch that. And people were like, what? And like, I get it. It's a cultural touchstone, but I also don't use that not watching things as like a conceit or like trying to be bougie.
Oh, I didn't watch that.
Right. You know, like, we all know people go, I don't own a television. You know, like, exactly. I'm not doing all of that. I'm just saying,
I don't have running water.
And you have to put your glasses down and say, holding a book. Oh, I don't own a television.
Right. And, you know, that's not where I'm coming from. But like, some of that is just kind of like, you know, and I say to my Patreon people all the time, I believe in there's 24 hours in a day. And there's only so many ways you can manipulate those things to work for you. And Netflix doesn't make the cut.
No.
Every month. You know what I'm saying? So,
dear boy, I don't own a Patreon. I'm sorry.
No, right? I would. There's a ton of video games I'd love to play. There's a ton of them. I would love to. I don't dare install them. I don't dare.
I was actually talking with some friends last night with Zooming, and I was saying that there was a time that I did play video games, and that stopped probably somewhere around when my brother used to live with me. So it's like, it was fun. It was like NBA Jam, first two Vice Cities or whatever. But I don't. I stopped, and it's not like I couldn't go buy a new PlayStation, and I probably wouldn't enjoy the games. But you do sort of have to weigh. Okay, let's say I have 3 hours of time today. Do I go play? Do I go to the gym? Do I go play PlayStation for 3 hours? And while it might be fun, what do I get back out of it? Right? What will it return to me? Now, maybe that's your hobby. That's your
steam blow off, right?
Yeah, that's you're blowing off steam, you know. Yeah. But as you get older, as you go through life, you go through changes. And what may work for you at 25 doesn't work at 40 or 45 or 50. And you won't really necessarily be able to predict that until you're actually at that point. And so, yeah, you know, I see some of these new games and I'm thinking, wow, you know, how many hours would it take me to, you know, get good at playing that game? Do I have 15 hours a week? If you played 2 hours a day, 90 minutes a day, well, that's 90 minutes I could probably apply to something else that would actually benefit me more. And when you guys are talking about the sacrifice or the trade, to me, it's not a sacrifice, it's a trade-off.
Okay. Speak on that, Mike Manley.
Right. So, you only have so much time, and then you have things that are important to you, and so you have to decide. Well, like when I was a teenager, and like I said, when I was 13, I decided I wanted to be a professional cartoonist, and I used to play sports when I was in high school, and I wasn't bad at sports, but I soon decided that I could not work a part-time job, go to school, practice 4 or 5 days a week and play a game, and put time into my art. So I gave up playing sports because I'm not going to go on and I'm not going to be a professional athlete. And I wanted to put the time into practicing and getting better. And of course, this is long before, you know, there was any lessons and I didn't have any mentors or anything like that. So it was basically me reading comics, the Comics Journal, practicing, studying. And the fact is if you are really into something, you also have to be stubborn enough, and I'm a very stubborn person, that even if other people who love you and support you, nobody will really understand it unless they too are on the same mission. And that's very hard for people, right? One of the things that really brought that home when I was a teacher, and teaching especially, you know, college students or teenagers, because I taught that high school class. So you may have a dream of being an animator or a cartoonist or whatever. You may not have anybody in your family who understands that at all, right? Now, we're probably living in a time where, because comics through the movies and everything is making so much money, the idea of you being a cartoonist and working for Marvel was something that somebody would know. Okay, that might seem for some people more of a reality, but I can tell you as a kid coming up, the one thing that helped me might have been the fact that my grandfather was a commercial artist. But still, being a cartoonist, I didn't know anybody else who was a cartoonist. And so you have all those books. You could get any book on cartooning or books from the library, but I didn't know any cartoonists. So was sort of, you were kind of like Indiana Jones too. You were trying to dig out any information you can. There weren't that many conventions. So you have this dream, but who knows when you will get there, right? But one thing I did figure is that, and it seems simple when you say it, all I have to do is get good enough. All I have to do is get my drawing good enough, and they would hire me, right? Of course, it took me from 13 to 23 for that to happen, right? There was my 10,000 hours, and I had never heard that term either. But I think that you have to, this ties into the personality thing I'm always saying. I was a very stubborn, very determined kid. So no matter what, I wasn't giving up on my dream, right? And in fact, I had jobs in high school in commercial art. I even got a job at an ad agency that I quit. I was on a salary, and I think I was making like $15,000 a year, and I was like 19 years old, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the people, and I quit. And I had a huge argument with my dad. Probably one of the biggest arguments we ever had, because I wanted to be a cartoonist. I didn't want to work in an ad agency. I didn't like the work. It was boring. But to my dad, who had a wife and 3 kids and responsibilities, it's like, hey, man, you got a good job, So after that, I went and worked in a restaurant. And I said, I'm not going to get another art job until I get working in comics. So I kept working on my portfolio. I sent my stuff in to Captain Canuck. I had George Freeman do a wonderful thing, go over my work and give me a critique and send it back to me. So I was getting encouraged. That was like the first real encouragement, right? And so I just kept at it until I got an opportunity doing a backup story in Evangeline, which led me to then helping Judith working at DC. She was working on a book for DC. So, but there was, that last year or two where you're getting close and people are liking your work, and then you just have to stay at it. But maybe it was because I'm completely stubborn. I also had nothing else competing, right? I didn't have a girlfriend who was telling me, well, what about me? Who cares about your stupid cartoons? That wouldn't have worked anyway, right? I didn't have any competing hobbies. Right? I was like completely obsessed with getting into comics. Or
were your folks still resistant to you going into that field, or was your dad regularly telling you, how about like forwarding you like opportunities listings from the newspaper while you were working on your cartooning career?
No, because you know what? I always had a job. From the time I was 13, I've always had a job. I started as a dishwasher. I got a job when I was in high school, by taking my portfolio and going around to all the places in Ann Arbor until this guy named Rocky hired me. So I was always good at being able to get a job. In fact, that job at that ad agency, I saw there was an ad in the paper, and what that ad agency had done is hired an outside agency to vet people for applicants. So what I did is I called all the art places in Ann Arbor until I found the one that hired that art agency. I went right there and showed them my portfolio and got the job. So I always had the drive, and I always had a job. But I understand the student who doesn't have anyone in their family who understands being an artist, right? It's like you saying, I'm going to be an actor, and everybody thinks, oh, well, great. Most actors never get a job, or I'm going to be a musician, whatever, you're going to be a rock star, whatever your your dream is if you don't have anybody in your unit of friends and family or teachers or mentors that understands that, it makes it difficult. Today, it's much easier from the standpoint that at least you can go on YouTube and you can see somebody. And there's many stories now. I mean, there's also, well, we talked about this before. There's sort of a whole how-to. There was no how-to in the 70s and the 80s. Now there's a how-to to do anything, right? But I think if you have to have the personality that says, I'm happy in my bedroom drawing and practicing. And, you know, the time may fly by and you may make sacrifices. And I think that's a common thing with anyone who is very successful at something that is actually difficult, because it's difficult to be an artist, right? It's difficult. I mean, even if you draw a really crappy comic book, you know, that's a lot of effort. For a young person, we know from JAMAR will tell you from teaching, getting somebody in a college class to turn in a 5-page story is like telling him to climb Mount Everest in a pair of sandals.
That's a wrap.
You know, it is really difficult. So you really have to have that combination of stubbornness and focus and the right kind of personality, so you're sort of satisfied. It's fun sitting there and drawing. It's also very frustrating at times. And if it's too frustrating, do you have the personality? That's where I think where the stubbornness helped me, is that even though there were times where I was very mad at myself, extremely frustrated, I just made myself, I just kept going like an obsessive type of person. So I think that's really something that you have to have, because you can have interests. I've taught hundreds of students by now who all were interested, all had interest in being an animator or, you know, an illustrator, cartoonist, but, you know, 1 or 2% makes it, because most people just can't dash themselves against the rocks that often. And, you know, they get to the point in their life where something else calls them more, or a situation calls, you know, says, well, I can't do this anymore. I mean, there's so many ways you can leave the path, you know.
I think that's maybe the chapter 2 of what we're talking about tonight, where I think fear is a giant predicator of all of this stuff. And sometimes I think some people get let off the hook when there's somebody in their way that says, you can't do this, do something else, you know, because that fear of actually, you know, we talk about imposter syndrome, but there's also fear of success, which I think is more sinister than fear of failure. You know, well, what happens if it does work? You know, that's something that a lot of people haven't figured out in their heads. It's like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, you know, that would have been such a foreign concept to me as a teenager, because I wanted it so bad.
Right.
And I sort of always felt like, well, because I lived in Michigan, because I lived in Detroit or in Ann Arbor, if I'd lived in New York, I would have been able to go up to, you know, Marvel or DC or Continuity, or I would have been able to meet a cartoonist and probably be a apprentice. But because of geography, where I was located, right, it made that possibility impossible, right? It just wasn't possible, you know. And I think most of the students, most of the young cartoonists I meet have the dream, but, you know, you also have to be willing to sacrifice in planning your life, if you say, okay, I want to do this. So if I have a 40-hour-a-week job that drains me, how much time am I going to have to put into my art? Right? Am I going to be able to get time off to go to a convention? All that stuff. Of course, now with the internet, I always tell younger artists, just put your stuff up. Put it up. Just flood the internet with you, right? Because if your stuff is good, people are going to see it. You're going to get attention. Something will work its way to you, but you got to do the hard part,
right?
The fun, which should be the fun part, which is putting your stuff up. But then people have a lot of, well, I don't want people taking my stuff for free. They have a lot of qualifications, a lot of like, well, I can't do this because of that.
A lot of excuses. Yeah.
Because of that. And to me, every time you do that, you just kind of push the goal further away. Because to me, I always thought it was fairly simple. Like I said, I wanted to do this, so how can I do it? I have to make my work good enough that when I send Stan Lee my art, right, or John Romita or whoever, they go, oh, this kid's stuff's not too bad.
I thought you were going to do the Stan Lee voice. So give it to me,
Mike Manley, I've been looking forward to meeting your work as I could have almost predicted it.
He's a prognosticator. And also to this point, we have a couple of questions that I want to put into the chat, so we have some more of an interactive episode.
Interactive.
I've been thinking a lot about kind of these roadblocks we've talked about, and because this is a serious topic, some of it might be like for the squeamish. Like I know a lot of Steve, was it you who said the word last week? A pro-am cartoonist.
I don't know. You mentioned that. I don't know. But I do think about the. I don't know if I did, but I
like it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the professional amateur, or somebody who's not, maybe has dabbled or has got a couple of client gigs or something like that, but they're not necessarily wanting to jump.
It's like the Etsy store of the career. It's like you've got your main job, you've got all the other things you're doing, and you've got your that other thing. It's not a hobby, but it's not a job. It's somewhere in that.
Well, it's not a job because it doesn't pay you enough, and you got to put a lot of time in, so it's not necessarily a hobby, right? And I know a lot of people in Artist Alley that go to that are like that, and there is probably in many of these people, this will sound mean, but there's probably some quality about their work or their approach to their work that keeps them from flipping into it full time. Like some people can't, maybe they don't draw well enough, or they're not good at telling a story, or their inking is really bad, but they insist on inking. There's a lot of reasons why that person, and I've known people like this, don't go on to become more successful. And part of that fits into the personality thing, because there's some quirk about your work, right? Which ties into our self-assessment, right? Mm-hmm. Being able to look at your work and go, why is my work not more successful? And be honest about it, not just say, well, people, they're just stupid and they can't appreciate my genius.
I think that's most people right there. They're all onion heads. They don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah. And
there's also a pernicious sense, and I've gotten this from a lot of people. I've seen this. It keeps popping up lately. I don't think it's an increasing trend. It's just, my experience of just seeing it more often, that there's a sense that it's not talent. It's who you know. There's a political angle to it. And they kind of think that since all art is subjective, therefore there isn't a yardstick. And since it's all gray, then it's really just who you know. And that it feels like that one hits me. Because my whole thing has been that I have to be so good that I can't be denied. Like you've got to be, there's a million reasons not to like my work, but it can't be because it's not good. Right? I have to make it so good that you can at least give it a chance.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. That's how I was as a teenager, right? As I felt that my goal was to make my work good enough that when preparation meets opportunity, which is what people call luck, I would be able to take advantage of the situation, right? Like a lot of people would say, well, you're lucky because you knew so-and-so and so, or you went to such and such a school and you have these connections, and, which is absolute bullshit, because 98% of all students who go to all art schools do not go on to be artists and don't go on to be professional artists. And that is even with many, many, many of the top schools, right? So, but people assume like, well, if I go to I wanted to go to Art Center. I didn't go to Art Center, right? That's where I wanted to go when I was a teenager. I didn't go. So now if there's any deficiency in my career, do I go like, well, my old man didn't send me to Art Center, so my whole, whatever I'm unhappy with, I go, oh, I didn't go to this special school with these special people and the magical contacts. I don't buy into that, because there's so many examples of people, especially in my generation and going back, who didn't go to school,
right?
Who didn't have someone teach them to do comics, like in a college course now, right? There's all these graphic novel courses you can take all over, right? But there is that hiccup, and I think it's mostly a personality thing of the person not being honest about yourself or about your abilities and your weaknesses, and that keeps them on the, let's say, pro-am side of the table. Because in my 40 years plus now of experience from going to shows and everything, if your work was good, if you saw an editor, you saw somebody, an artist who said, wow, this is good, they would give you a contact to follow up, or they'd give you a script. They would give you something. They didn't want to know what school you went to. Oh, you're so-and-so and so. I've actually seen that happened to me.
Do you know who my daddy is?
Right, exactly. But there was, I think it was last year, all those pandemic years kind of crush, but there was threads on Twitter where I would see young people saying, one thread was, all you older people need to get the fuck off the horse because it's our time to ride, and all these people are getting jobs because they all went to the special school and they know the special people, and I didn't go, so it's like not fair, which again, I think is that's sort of like sour grapes.
But I get that. There's definitely, sometimes there are people who you I think you can honestly say that maybe their artwork isn't up to what would have been the commercial standard 40 years ago, but they're successful now for whatever reason. I heard a lot of belly aching about that because it was very fashionable at the time. That work was hot. Like, it wasn't necessarily good, but it was hot. And people would begrudge that. And I didn't, I don't know, a lot of the sour grapes, a lot of that stuff, there's legitimacy to that. I do think younger artists especially can feel that they're not getting the chance, not having the opportunity. And there's so many things working against you all the time. It is such an uphill battle. At least it is from it's. I have felt it's been an uphill battle, and I'm bathed in privilege.
But it was an uphill battle for me as a teenager, right? Every generation has environmental conditions that are not favorable to you, right? I had environmental conditions that were not favorable to me because I didn't have technology and I did not have easy access to knowledge or contacts to people. That happened as I got older, right? Now you've got, the boogeyman of AI. We were talking right before the thing, supposedly DC may have used AI in an issue of Batman, and Todd picked some guy who used AI. Hollywood only has maybe a half dozen shows in production. Print is not, the direct market is not. So there's always some unfavorable condition going on, right? That you have absolutely no control over. You can't control any of that.
Yeah.
You can't control whether DC tomorrow replaces everybody with a robot, an editor with a list of prompts for this issue of Batman, right? You have no control over that. What you do have control over is yourself.
Is the work. Yeah.
The work.
Yeah. That's always been that's like whatever it came down to, was like, because part of what we do is anonymous. We're behind the camera. People don't see us; they see the work. And apart from here, and I think that I've always liked that aspect of it. But it means the work has to be that much better.
I want to kind of touch on this. Billy Bob, who is a new pencileer who came in on the slipstream of Brian Lee O'Malley. Hey, Billy Bob. Billy Bob says, that's one good thing about social media and being an artist with opportunities, but there's a lot of issues with the algorithm. So speaking about the modern creative, I've seen a lot of people be discouraged by it, unfortunately. So something that is supposed to be so easy. Hey, just put your stuff on the internet, like Mike says. There's a lot of resistance and pushback, even from the ones and zeros that are behind all this stuff.
Well, that's true. And I was just talking to both Li Yang and Mimi about this. And Li Yang who's my assistant, was complaining about, she's not getting any tread on Instagram. And I said, there's always going to be a new platform that everybody loves, and then that one will get corrupted, and then there'll be another new platform that everybody loves. But now you sort of have to blast them all and just keep putting stuff out and trying to find out, one of the positives of Instagram is that you can do the professional account, and then you can see what your statistics are. So I can look at it and says, what cities, what age, what sex, what things are popular. So that at least gives you something, right? That gives you something that you can go with. And I found that the younger your base of fans are, the harder it is to make money off of them. Because young people in general don't want to spend money. They don't have as much money to spend. But people over 40 have money. They will spend money. So you have to also do some work on your own to figure out who your audience is. If that's the audience that you want, right? And how do you build that? How do you build the audience? Where are your people? What are you offering people? I think the thing is with a young artist, you have to be willing to put out a lot of stuff for free to get people to love your work and to love your journey, and love your process, and get to know you not just your drawing, but also you as a person and your journey. They invest in you. That person might be willing to give you $5 a month or $50 a year.
Yeah.
There's some hotness going on in the chat. So also cutting to the quick, our boy Ramon, whatever Ramon says, but hold on, you guys, could this just be Darwinism in action? If you're discouraged by the hurdles, then maybe you shouldn't be here.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think
podcast over.
Right. I think there's always going to be, just in my career, there has always been some new hurdle, right? Because when I got in the mid 80s, it was really like comics had always been. You just needed pencil, pen, paper. There was no social media. There wasn't even any fax machines. None of that. You went in, you got your stuff, you went up to the office, or they mailed it to you or sent it by FedEx. Then the faxes came, then the internet came, and every single advancement, which can be a plus, can also be a negative. So now for me to work for King Features, I have to have, a digital tablet and an internet, and I just did my yearly subscription to Photoshop and
Adobe Suite.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have all that stuff. If those things are hurdles that you cannot, it's too much of an affront, then this really isn't the job for you, because I don't know what's coming tomorrow, right? I do know that, if AI keeps going, it is going to make things more complicated, right? Much more complicated for people that are younger than me. And so I'm fortunate that at this stage I do have a group of fans who like my work. And that's one of the things that I've come to realize over the last 3 or 4 years especially, is I have a group of fans who read my stuff as kids. They are slowly aging now, as is the whole direct market is slowly aging out of buying comics, right? And so if you're a cartoonist coming in and you want to do a newspaper strip or a web strip, or you want to do your own Kickstarters, then you have to be willing to put in the time and the research and the effort to figure out how any of these systems or these new systems will come up will be a boon or a detriment to you. And if that's too difficult, you don't like that, then you will be the pro-am person probably, and again, there's nothing wrong with hobbyists. Most of the students that I've taught end up being hobbyists, and there's nothing wrong with that, because if art enriches your life and gives you pleasure, makes your life better, that's fantastic. But if you're going to do it as a professional, then you have to approach it as a professional, and it's just like part of the game. It's like, maybe I would have never used Photoshop, but the industry demanded that I use Photoshop, so I use Photoshop. You know what I mean? If the industry says we want everything delivered digitally, well, I can't be the guy who goes like, well, out of all your cartoonists working for you, no, I put mine in a box.
Yeah, you need a fax machine.
Yeah.
But we're talking about you got me thinking with this comment about being discouraged about the story circle again, about the challenges, the tribulations, the hardships of all this. Like that, the idea of discouragement to me is like it has a defeatist quality. It's because you're discouraged, not just slowed down or hitting an impediment, but actually kind of being knocked off your path, totally being discouraged, being like you're leaving this behind. And we know a lot of people who had promising cartooning careers, or at least were promising cartoonists, who were just at some point distracted. You know, or if they found a day job, they found real estate pays better. You know, that sort of thing.
Right.
Or
Yeah. Or
you know, oh, they just had triplets. Okay,
Right,
we'll see
exactly.
you in 30 years. You know,
Right. That's
right.
the weird thing. I mean, I know Jamar's probably experienced this too. So I had students that I knew at 19 that are in their 40s now. Right. And so when you're 19, you're all bright eyed and bushy tailed, and you've got the world is open to you. The possibilities are open. And then you're 40 and you know, if you go through your first marriage, you got kids, you got a car loan, you got your student loan you're still paying for, right? And so I think you kind of have to plan smartly too. Like when I advise art students now, I really don't necessarily advise somebody we want to do comics or go into animation. I don't necessarily advise you to go to college. I think there's enough information. If you work hard enough, there's online stuff. You can get feedback from people. Save that $150,000, $200,000 because you might have some lean times. And if you can work remotely, which is the great thing about cartooning, right? You don't go into a studio. You know, your studio can be anywhere. So maybe you need to have a low overhead, you know, so you're not constantly maxed out, you know.
Yeah. And what you just said, I think is really important to kind of like, I was thinking about at the beginning of my kind of comic book industry career, I had enough kind of knowledge of how things work that I could self-publish a comic book. And this was like really early internet. And there wasn't like Dogpile or Alta Vista search things. I just kind of went to the library and got books on business to figure this out. And I said this in a couple of my classes over the years, is just because you know a certain way that things work in your head, like I want to do comics, so I need to do a comic book, which also needs to be in my local comic book store. That means I made it, and that's kind of all you're going by.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you get to that point, which is it's really hard to even get that far, it's kind of like a half laid road. You know what I mean? Like you don't really, you're kind of there, but you don't really have a plan, right? So to say, hey, you know what? I want to do a comic or a comic book, but what happens if I don't put it in a comic book store? What other avenues are, available to me? I think maybe that's more of a modern idea than, in 1995 as an idea. Like, I'm just going to do my coffee man comic and give it to baristas and coffee shops versus trying to get in a Diamond or the Previews catalog.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, going back to what I've said over previous shows, I think there's also having a savvy idea of the industry you're trying to go into is really important, and how it changes like weekly. It's really important. But I think I lost. I lost what I was going to say.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you have to study the industry, know the industry, know how the industry is working. Do you know who the publishers are? Do you know who the publishers are of the work that you're interested in doing? Do you know how the distribution works? Do you understand, how the railroad works, right? And part of the sacrifice is you have to be willing to invest the time to understand that, if you just want to be, lazy and go like, well, I'm just going to draw it and I'm going to put it out there. And you also have to be willing to sacrifice from the standpoint that you might have to produce 3 or 4 years worth of comics. There's not going to earn you any money. Seriously earn you any money to build the kind of career that you want, right? Because you need to have enough material available and easily accessible to people to see, to generate opportunity. And I saw a funny little cartoon the other day. It was a cartoon of somebody. He said, "Oh, I just drew a picture," and he hands it to this other person, and he goes, "Great," and he tosses on it a big pile that said, like all the pictures on the internet, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is
content.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. So part of it is there's so much material flying by our eyeballs now. There's never been more content available to people than at this very moment.
It seems like there'd be we talked about getting into becoming a cartoonist or having a life as a cartoonist or a career as a cartoonist. You'd have the pros, not pro-am, but the cons column and the pros column. And the cons is basically everything we're talking about tonight. Like it's all the stuff that's like, all the I guess I'm having ramen again until the Kickstarter pays, or until I get my orders from Diamond, or the whole idea of how much of your career, given that what we're doing is entertainment, ostensibly, that a lot of what we're doing is in the hands of other people. Like you put your pack, the way it would be done in the past in the comic book direct market, even the way it's done now, if you want to get your comic book into comic book stores, producing this kit, this basically a proof of concept, and submitting it for Diamond, the main distributor, to see if they're going to carry it. And oh wow, they do carry it. And now they're going to send this solicitation out to all the comic stores. Will they order it? And there's so much of it is out of your hands.
And you need to take out that ad in Preview's catalog, which costs like $1 zillion.
So if it's an editor or the Diamond or the retailers or the algorithm, all those things we're up against and having to beat our heads against every single day. And yet new people are coming in. They embrace that and they are becoming successful. Sure. But there's a little last comic convention I was at, there was a guy who was like, he was going to do comics because at one point he wanted to be a YouTuber, but that wasn't working out. So he wanted to do comics. And I'm like, it felt like, yeah, all right, about the same odds.
I want to be a teenage influencer, but I'm 55.
Right. So like when you were telling your dad, I want to be a cartoonist, it's a lot like parents today hearing, oh, I want to be a streamer.
Right. I want to be an esports.
Yeah. My dad was supportive. I mean, he paid for my first year of college. But I don't think now, of course, they understand, right? But I still think that was a difference between an older, more mature person and someone who had a dream, who was willing to take. My feeling was, I'm willing to take the risk. Right? I'm willing to take the risk to do what I want because I don't have a wife and 3 kids. Right? If I had a wife and 3 kids, that changes all the rules. Right? So part of the sacrifice is planning to sacrifice, planning to take a risk, but you should be as prepared as possible to take your risk. That's not something we always do when we're younger because you don't know what you don't know. Right. You've never been prepared for it before. Right. You see a lot of stuff on YouTube and people are telling you, just 1, 2, 3, real easy. You do this, you do that. You have a whole thing of that now where you have young people seeing stuff on TikTok, as I was telling Steve before we went on. It does not give you a real representation of the effort that goes into making something. And like I always say, the worst comic book you see has hundreds of hours into it, right? A 22-page typical comic book that you would look at and go, well, that sucks. I don't like the story and I don't like the art or whatever. There's hundreds of hours of people working on that. And so again, I think you have to have the right kind of personality, but you also really have to really plan and you have to be willing to sacrifice. So if let's say it took 300 pages or 500 pages of comic art, right? I mean, I don't know how many pages I drew from the time I was 13 to the time I was 23. A lot. Most of them bad, right? But I couldn't get to better without going from the bad, right? And so let's say I did 150. You might have to do 200. Another person might have to do 500. Another person might do 50. There's no predicting it, but you have to be willing to do whatever it is you have to do if you want to achieve the dream. And I think that's the part that you have the control over. It's not like, well, if you want to play in the NBA, you got to be a certain height. If you want to do, there's a lot of jobs that you can't do for a variety of reasons. And I think with art, it's application, because I don't think I was a particularly super talented person. I think I was a highly focused person that was able to continue to improve because I was focused. It wasn't like, oh, I'm like a little Mozart or something, or as a little, just boing, just no, it's not like that. It was not like that. And sometimes actually, if the art is too easy for a person, they might have the big risk of flaming out early, because I've also seen that.
Mm-hmm.
They won't be able to last.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about something that Steve said earlier about when you're having triplets and you're also trying to get ready for the comic book convention at the end of
Don't forget to pack the triplets.
the season is, and I'll just throw this out here because I want it to be a little spicy.
Mm-mm.
How realistic is it to want to be, we'll just talk about comics because that's what we know, to be a comic book artist and start a family?
Spice.
Right? Or it's, or like say, you and your sweetie from college, she tolerated all of your antics in art school, but now
your antics.
Time to crap or get off the pot, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a little.
I'm tired of Zipatone on the bed sheets. Damn it!
Well, there's a little bit of doing the local comic convention scene where it's a little bit like, I'm gonna go. You're doing open mics. There's a very much like, it's kind of this low level success. There's a low level, I don't know, almost background radiation amount of success, and it can feel like enough, but it's not enough to sustain you. Like, I feel like I get the sense a lot of tables are being sold in artist alleys for people who just want to be behind a table for a weekend. It's not even moving the product is less reward than sitting behind a table and having people come up and talk to you about your work.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of things are changing, though. I think there's a lot of, and I know this just from talking to my assistants, a lot of artist alleys are overcrowded now, and so there's a lot more wait lists than there used to be. And I think part of that is the fact that the industry has shifted to people going, well, I can't get in at Marvel and I can't get it in at DC, so I'm going to be a weekend warrior. I'm going to go around to the various shows. I'm going to get my table and, put out my wares. And I know contemporaries who are at shows every weekend. It seems like they're at some show. And I think the reason they're at a show is because they're not getting regular penciling or inking work anymore. So, there's a lot of reasons to be at an artist alley, but I think once you get out of your 20s, it becomes increasingly difficult to nigh impossible to do what we think as the average cartoonist, just because of the way life becomes. Now I still think that King Features will look at your strip if you can, you follow their guidelines and you want to pitch a strip, but you better be prepared to probably pitch more than one strip, or
what Jamar was talking about how the real world and relationships and kids and that all that element, it's such a big deal. So many successful cartoonists, they'll talk. I know there's quite a few. I'm not going to point fingers, but they're like, they'll tell you how successful, let's talk about success, and they don't mention the fact that they've been living off their partner's health insurance. There's a big element of that is that kind of support system, the idea that you have a partner who's willing to support this crazy endeavor, because at some point, until it clicks, until that engine turns over and it can be considered self-sustaining and successful, and who knows how long that it will be till it gets to that point, you definitely need a partner. So many success stories in comics. I think Jackie Estrada has a book about the partners of cartoonists, and how it took them, you needed that support system, someone who wasn't just saying this is a big waste of time. Those things are heavy weights on some creators. I like what Ramon said about being I don't want to misquote him, but he said he was in a fortunate situation, so that was good.
Yeah, well, JRD said something in here which I want receipts. I don't believe him. He said, "What up, Notorious JRD?" He said, "Some of that depends on how much your spouse believes in you."
Right.
Wow, that's deep. I know artists who almost quit, but their spouses wouldn't let them because they hadn't exhausted every chance. And then I said, "I don't believe you. I want names. Who are these people?"
That's beautiful.
In the things that I've seen, it's usually the opposite. It's, when are you going to stop?
Right.
This bullshit campaign, because we got to pay. The light bill is due.
Well,
I'm feeling like helping someone get through their college degree, and then it's their turn. It's that sort of thing where
some couples do that. I've actually known couples that were, I'm going to go to art school and you're going to work, and then you're going to go to art school, and then I'm going to, they traded. I've also known artists where it's like they're going out with somebody and then, oh, that's cool, you're an artist. Yeah, it's But then eventually the art becomes like the other woman, like, well, why aren't you paying all your attention to me? And then that person's like, well, I want to work on my art. And then it becomes like, well, I don't want you to work on your art. I want you to work on me. And so, I mean,
sorry, Steve.
Yeah, we're both jumping on that one. Yeah.
I think this has been a very rewarding career. It has been very difficult, but at times. But I think, like I said, if you plan, you always have to make sacrifices, and that's just part of the price that you pay. Every job has sacrifices, right? Every job has sacrifices. You may make a lot of money and actually hate your job, right?
That's most of America,
right? I mean, I get to say every morning, I don't love every comic that I've ever drawn, or I don't love every week every strip that I've drawn, but I love my job. This is what I chose to do. I worked very hard to get to it, and I still work very hard to stay at it. So, but I don't think I ever had any fantasy of what it would be like. I think even as a teenager, from reading all the things like in the Comics Journal and things like that, I was also aware that for many of the artists in the generation that I admired coming up, it didn't always work out for them. Some were alcoholics or whatever. There was plenty of sad stories where, as Jack Kirby would say, comics will break your heart, kid. But there were other people who did really, really well and seemed to be very happy. I just think you have to be honest with yourself, again, which is maybe the first and maybe the hardest step. Because a lot of people just are not really honest with themselves. They think they're putting in the maximum effort. Maybe they're not. Maybe they get feedback, but they ignore it. You know, I've seen that. You know, you can tell. I mean, I know as a teacher, you can give a student a critique and they're like, eyes just kind of glaze over, or they think you're wrong. No, you're wrong. My drawing is great, and you're not. That's not right. You know. So are you? If you get a critique, do you really take it to heart? Do you really do what the person advised you, or do you kind of blow it off?
I'm kicking it in the chat, and I was thinking about different kind of eras of people, kind of like the idea of there's like a, Tezuka's poor wife who she never saw him because he was at the studio for weeks out of the month, and then he like came home to like get new underwear and leave again. You know what I mean? Or even like I don't know, like a Roz Kirby or something like that. The idea that you're going to be the successful person who someone magically puts dinner in your lap in a coffee while you
That would be nice.
where you do your thing without your creativity being interrupted. But now the modern human being in those kind of relationships are partnerships, and it's not you just kind of checking into the office at 9 a.m. and with the door closed.
There's so many variations on that, because I know people who had a very traditional marriage where the male who was the cartoonist worked and the wife was very supportive of them and took care of the kids and all that stuff, and it worked out. And then there's other people where it's like every man for themselves, and but the fact is anyone who's a cartoonist is going to spend a minimum 60 hours a week working. It's no 40-hour-a-week cartoonist that I know of. Minimum, you're going to spend 60, if not 80. I remember reading an interview with Dan Barry, who said that he worked 6-7 days a week doing the Phantom.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who does that much of regular work is easily putting in.
Yeah, that was that line I've quoted before. It was Hal Foster and Prince Valiant. How long does it take you to do a page? It was a weekly. It was a Sunday page. Oh, that's easy. 54 hours. He knew it was. He got it down to 54 hours to do that page. I'm like,
right.
That's all.
Right. And if you found 30 of those 54 hours was like pulling teeth, you'd never make it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd never make it. If you think about all the great artists you admire, every great artist you admire has to find more pleasure in working than really just about anything else. Even their own personal relationships, even their own wives and kids. I think a lot of those artists really, it was all consuming for them.
Well, see, that's what I was getting at. And I think like that's really hard to pull off in 2024. I am consumed in flames by the art desk when you have a wife and 3 children in the other room.
Well, if you set it up and your wife is that kind of
respecting that creative time is super hard to create that kind of force field around yourself while you're in that spirit, because you just, you're there. Can't you just, while you're there, don't you just take care of that litter box or as a random example?
Right. Right. Well, and I guess maybe the thing is setting, like, let's being realistic. You have a relationship, you have a family, you have outside things that are real that need your attention, like picking your kids up at 3 o'clock at school. Mm-hmm. Is that you need to create a schedule for yourself that is going to let you survive as a married person or whatever your deal is. It's like, okay. And I talk to a lot of, I don't have kids, but I talk to a lot of buddies who do. And they go, oh, you know what? Well, I get the kids up, get them out, I work until noon, have lunch, and then at 3 I stop and go get the kids, bring them home, kind of do the thing with them for a bit. Then I go back to the boards at 8. So you kind of have to work it in. But I guess the idea of can't you see I'm in here creating doesn't work. Like you saw The Shining. That's what that whole movie was about. He just wanted to be left alone so he could type with his typewriter.
Well, I think if people who have been married a long time and plan to have their kids, they kind of work that out. I mean, you do have the one thing about being a cartoonist is you do have a lot of flexibility in your day as long as you get the work in on the deadline. So if you wanted to get up at 5 in the morning and work until 3 and spend the rest of the time with your kids and whatever, you can do that, right? I mean, that's a luxury you have in this job. Because if you were like, oh, I got to go work at Ford, and the shift starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're there at 8 o'clock in the morning no matter what, right? So I think the hard part is, and I've said this before on the podcast, the older you get, the harder it becomes to do this job if you have not started it when it was in your 20s, mostly because of your personality. And your personality becomes more and more and more fixed. And there are people who become successful later in life, but it's not hundreds of them. It's very few people that I know who got into comics when they were in their 30s, in like full-time professional. Most people get into it in their 20s, because that's when you have the most time, you can afford to be the most selfish, right? The most you have high energy. You can work all-nighters. You can do all the sacrifices that come with part of the job. I mean, a lot of times in the beginning of my career, I had opportunity. That opportunity meant that I sacrificed things like sleep or, I don't know, going to see a movie, right? Like I remember when one of the Harry Potter movies came out. Well, I couldn't go see it. Well, I couldn't go see it until I was done with my deadline, right? So you think, okay, that's not a big sacrifice, but there are many, many, many sacrifices that I made, especially in my 20s, because I wanted whatever job, whatever opportunity. And usually opportunities came at that stage where it's like, oh, so-and-so is late, ink these 3 pages. So-and-so is such and such is late. Can you do it? Oh, you should have a month, but you've got 2 weeks, right? Or you took that job and then another job comes along and you're like, oh man, I want that job too. So you double up on opportunity.
Double bagging it.
Right. And I had many, many things like that happen where I was working on 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, which meant I sacrificed a lot of sleep in my 20s and my 30s, a lot.
Well, we got a bunch of questions here in the chat. I'm not sure how many we have time to get to. We're already running over, but I like this one. I thought this was you guys have some thoughts on this one from Cartoonist Jack on YouTube. It was, what are the personality traits that you guys see in someone who might be in the 1 or 2% that makes it? A little shout out to John Gallagher. He might have mentioned patience a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, patience. Patience is a virtue. But also, I think, kind of to what Mike has said, stubbornness and maybe almost like a willingness not to give up or give in. Now, I don't necessarily think that equates to success. I know a lot of people who won't give up, but probably should and I'm not being mean to say that, but they're just, they're going to go down swinging. And I think that's a valiant warrior death. But when you talk about making it, there's a thing where you really have to stick to your guns, no matter what people tell you.
Did you guys ever get discouragement from somebody, like a negative feedback in a way that you had to have a screw you attitude and just keep going?
Well, my whole childhood was like that. Like even when I was at Performing Arts High School, they hated my guys. I've told you those stories. They thought I was a ringleader and like nobody liked cartooning at the art school. It was like, just draw this goddamn bowl of fruit and go to class. And I was like, well, I respect that and I want to learn all of the things. But yeah, that's what did one of my teachers call it? That's ghetto art. It's cartooning.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So like maybe that resistance is, and I'm not you tell me no and I'm going to say yes and find a way. I'm not that guy. Like I'm not fueled by that. But at the same time, I didn't have cheerleaders.
I think you have to be open and willing to do whatever it is you have to do to reach your goal. So if the teacher says, your figures are weak or the gestures are weak or your inking is bad or whatever the criticism you're getting. And usually if you ask several professionals, you usually will get a fairly consistent level of feedback. So the personality type is the kind will say, literally have a notepad, and when the person says such and such and such, you go, okay. And then that's what you will work on. Right, you have to be stubborn, but not stubborn in the negative way. Stubborn in that you're not going to give up, and that you're going to push yourself to get over that, whatever that next hurdle is. Right, like I remember seeing, I think it was Keith Pollard at a show in Detroit when I was probably around 14, and I remember him saying something about the way I drew the heads on a neck. And I literally wrote that down, and I put that on a piece of paper above my drawing board. So that was I'm gonna work on that thing. That's what I'm gonna work on. So the personality is that you're not going to give up, but you're also open to being able to implement the changes, which 98% of people are not. They think they are, but they actually are not. They're not willing to put the time in to do it.
When early on in my career, I trained to be a short order cook, and I was told by my dad, who did that as long as you knew how to do that, you could always get a job, and that was always my safety blanket. I always had like, I can do whatever I want. I can keep doing whatever I want because they're always going to need a short order cook somewhere. I haven't had to go back to do that yet.
You're not an IHOP flipping them jacks.
Nothing wrong with it, but so far I managed to keep it going. But that's absolutely been something that, despite any discouragement I've had, it's always been a thing where I'm like, okay, push comes to shove, I make a mean omelet. All right. So what else we got here in the burner?
Steve's got the board, so go ahead, Steve. What's next?
I'm trying to have one that's not going to open up an hour worth of thoughts here. Okay, Cartoonist Jack, you're getting a twofer. I'm gonna. Who or what has
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, put it back.
Cartoonist Jack on YouTube. I got a question for you guys. Who or what has catched your fall when you were discouraged?
Well, you guys go. You guys go first.
To me, it's always been a thing where I've needed, because very early on in my cartooning career, I tied it to needing to do it to pay for rent and to keep the lights on. So I've never had I've never been able to wallow in discouragement. I've never had the luxury of going, oh, I'm discouraged. It's always been a thing where it's like, well, I gotta pay rent. I'm so hooked on living indoors that that I had to find a way. So that was always a thing that has been a fire under me the whole time.
Mike, you go.
Well, I think the biggest discouragement I ever had was actually the first time I went to Marvel. I could have had a job. They were going to hire me to draw a thing that went in a comic book that went in a toy.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't stay in New York, and they didn't want to give it to me to go back to Michigan. But in short order, I was ended up working in comics anyway. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I really had a discouragement. I've had the frustration, but I think because I was just so stubborn about like I was going to make this, I wasn't going to let. I was more discouraged by me looking at my work and wanting it to, struggling to get it to the next level than actually people. Like if somebody gave me a criticism, like a professional, I didn't get discouraged by that, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted more praise. Like I said, when George Freeman sent me that critique, that was like a beautiful, amazing gesture that he would take that time to go over my work and do drawings and layouts and everything. I think you have to be in your own corner, like Mickey and Rocky. You've got to be in your own corner, and it is hard to be an artist. We all want to be loved. You're not always going to be loved. It's much harder with the internet because the internet hates everything. So that does, I think, sort of make it harder. But I think if you're true to your goals, true to yourself, you will, you might have a down day or two, but then it'll slough off. It'll slough off. It won't keep you down, I mean, it is hard, but that's like part of the job. I mean, imagine people that are going out and being an actor. You get mostly rejections until one day, you're in a movie, and then that movie's a success, and then suddenly everybody likes you. Oh yeah, you're suddenly good. And I remember when I was sharing Al Williamson's studio, and I was trying to get back in at Marvel, and I was doing like activity books and stuff. I remember both he and Brett said, like once you get back in, you're in. And there was that issue of Daredevil that I worked on with Al over Ditko stuff. And Carl Potts loved it, and he gave me Alpha Flight to ink. And then I had that brief period between like Conan the King and when I worked on that other stuff. Started inking Alpha Flight. And I never had a down day in comics since then. So, sometimes you might have to go sideways, but, and you might be frustrated, but, you can't let that, you just can't let it stop you. You just got to be strong.
Yeah. I think in my thing, I've been saying for a while now that I think it's really important to kind of living in the middle of everything, because there's going to be a lot of downs. There's also going to be a lot of ups. And I think I also kind of subscribe to the iceberg theory, right? Like everybody just sees the successes, or they see you winning. And I even try to I try to not curate my social media to just be always about me being, whatever. Like sometimes you fail, sometimes things don't work. There's a million things that I didn't get versus the one thing that I got. You know what I'm saying? So if you're always just living to be up here, that's unrealistic. So I just try to like take the wins with a lot of humility, and also take the losses and not let them kill you. You know what I'm saying? So just being right here is probably what keeps me, well, even when I'm discouraged, to just keep going, because I know it's not going to end me one way or the other. And even when I get a really high success, that's not the end of the story either. And that could go away or change or turn into something else. It's just like you got to keep swimming, like the shark says.
Speaking of wins, let's get back to one thing you said at the beginning of this, Jamar. Thanks for the question, Cartoonist Jack. You got your order today.
Oh, yeah.
Winning.
Yeah. So real quick, I got an email from my editors at Scholastic Graphics that said that Leon, Worst Friends Forever, all the final edits have been finalized. The book is going to the printer. So I'm very excited about that. It's been a long road, but I'm really proud of the work. I'm proud of the book. I think people are going to love it, and it really kind of continues with the story arc of these young kids that I think you'll really love if you haven't started to love them already. So it's a big day for me.
Congratulations. That's lovely.
Yeah, that's great. Now get to work on book 3.
Already on it. So is that it, Steve? Good job.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we ran long, and thank you everyone for we kept them on the hook for that finding out about your orders. We made them wait till an hour and 40 minutes.
I love it, and thanks you guys for sticking it in with the pause, for sticking it out with us for so long. I'm trying to keep the episodes to an hour and a half, just so we all don't turn into mushrooms by the end of the night. But we got to get back to the boards, you guys. That's what we do, right? So thank you again for all the new eyeballs. Please come back again next Wednesday. It's time to start putting in my plugs. You guys, I wish I don't have a graphic. I forgot to talk about a graphic, Steve.
That's my fault.
Here is a preview for next week. You guys, we have a fantastic tag team of guests: Todd Johnson and Larry Stroman. The Tribe team is going to be on Pencil to Pencil. I believe they're going to launch a new Tribe series. And Todd was nice enough to contact me to like, yo, how can we get on Pencil to Pencil? I was like, oh, word. So we're going to have a fantastic time next week. And I have more superstars lined up, but you'll have to wait until then.
A cavalcade of stars.
That's right. The king of cartoons. So guys, thanks so much. Let's say goodnight. Thank you to my co-hosts Mike and Steve. Thank you for making these possible, and thanks for helping us keep the lights on. Guys, thanks to you. If you've been hanging out with us for so long and you have not thumbed up these episodes, if you haven't liked these, what are you doing?
Why do you even have thumbs if you're not thumbing?
Please like, subscribe, please hit the alert bell. I've been starting to use the community tab on our YouTube channel to kind of give people a preview of the episode that's coming up. So people, you have no excuse at this point. You know we're going to have something hot every week. So please get in there and make it happen. All right. So for Steve and Mike, I am Jamar. Guys, I've been saying it since we started this in 2020. It would behoove you to keep those curvy hands clean, because when Skynet comes, you're going to have to make sure you don't have fingerprints. So let's go. We'll see you guys next week. Tribe, be there. See ya.